As a huge fan of the Three Musketeers, I've tried to see every version that's ever been put on film. Don Amici and the Ritz brothers. Gene Kelly took a crack at it in a version that co-starred Angela Lansbury. In the early 70s, Richard Lester made two films at the same time, The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers, and they were released a year apart. His version treated the Musketeers more like the Three Stooges because of his love of slapstick, but what a cast! Michael York, Oliver Reed, Richard Chamberlain, Frank Finlay, Faye Dunaway, Christopher Lee, and Charlton Heston. Some years later, they made a sequel called 20 Years After, which was based on a Dumas story, and the original actors came back and reprised their roles. There was the 90s MTV version with Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, Oliver Platt, and a very American D'Artagnan and Chris O'Donnell. More modern versions starred Logan Lerman and Eva Green. There's been countless others. And then there's the offshoots, which star the characters of the Musketeers in other stories, like The Man in the Iron Mask. There's been many versions of that, the most recent being the Leonardo DiCaprio, Jeremy Irons, Gerard Depardieu version. And movies like At Sword's Point, which starred Cornel Wilde, Maureen O'Hara, and Alan Hale Jr., which featured the sons and daughters of the Musketeers. I could go on and on. I've even seen the animated versions, the Walt Disney take with Mickey Mouse, Goofy, and Donald as the Musketeers, and of course Tom and Jerry, where Jerry and his little mouse friend Nibbles play the Musketeers and Tom plays the Cardinal's Guard. So when I tell you that my favorite version of this story is the BBC series The Musketeers from 2014, it's saying something. Now, I know it's not fair to compare movies to television series. In a television series, the writers and the actors have multiple episodes, in fact, multiple seasons, in which to tell their story and to craft the characters and fully develop them. A film has much more limited time. However, I can honestly tell you after the first episode of this series, I knew more about these characters, was more invested in them, and was more involved in the story than I had ever been in any of the film versions that I'd seen. This, in large part, is due to the fact that the creator really wanted to tell an old-fashioned story where the heroes were really heroes and not anti-heroes. And this series succeeds on that level. And it's exactly what I was looking for out of these characters. All of the Musketeers are well cast. It's very hard for me to pick a favorite because all four characters were so strong and all four actors were so strong. But if I did have to pick a favorite, I've always liked the character of Athos, and I always felt like he got somewhat shortchanged in the film versions because his story is so compelling, they don't spend enough time on it. Here, they do. Tom Burke plays Athos, and his portrayal is excellent. He provides a lot of layers to the character. You're definitely involved in his journey, and to see what plays out over the 30 episodes of this series and where his character goes is pretty incredible. As it is, frankly, with all of the Musketeers. Santiago Cabrera, who can currently be seen in Star Trek Picard, plays Aramis. Now, Aramis is always the romantic Musketeer. He's the ladies' man, but he's also the religious one. He's a conflict. The juxtaposition of the character is very interesting. And Cabrera does this better than any other Aramis I've ever seen. He balances these two aspects. He believes in religion, but he has questions. He loves the women he's involved with, but he's afraid to commit. He also does everything honorably, but he's tortured by this because even when he acts honorably, sometimes others are made to suffer as a result, and he has a hard time dealing with this. D'Artagnan here is played by Luke Pasqualano, and he's my favorite D'Artagnan. He's chivalrous, he's heroic, honorable, and he's a great swordsman as he's supposed to be. Unlike the films, he's loyal, especially to Constance. I always had a problem in the version with Michael York, in the version with Chris O'Donnell. They were just doing what the script required, but in both of those films, D'Artagnan's loyalty to Constance wavers. Now, D'Artagnan does get involved with another woman in the series, but that's really before he's involved with Constance, and once he is with her, he stays with her, and he's true to her, and I think that's important to the character, and it works very well here. The The musketeer that probably gets the biggest makeover is Porthos. Most films portray Porthos basically one note. He's big, strong, and lumbering, and he can crush anything in his path. And while Howard Charles certainly can do that, there's so much more to his Porthos. The journey that the character takes and the journey that the actor takes to bring the character to fruition by the end is so interesting here, and it's such a unique take and a fresh approach to the character of Porthos that it's really amazing, because he has such a great backstory and so many more things that he brings to the table, and there's a lot of heart in his character. He definitely, I don't question in any of the films that Porthos cares about his fellow musketeers, but here it is so obvious how much he cares and how close he is to his fellow musketeers. And while we're on that subject, the chemistry between the four leads is incredible in this series. If you tell me that they are not great friends in real life, I would be floored, because the dynamic between them, the bond between them is so strong here. I would find it hard to believe that they're not true friends in real life. The female characters are well served here as well. Constance is played by Tamla Carey, and she's very different than we see her in the books or the films. She gets a very different kind of story arc here. She's around through the entire series, and that affects D'Artagnan differently than we see in perhaps the films, where he loses Constance. And she gets to do some interesting things here, and I really like where they took her character. Mamie McCoy plays Milady de Winter, and while she is a very traditional Milady de Winter, all the trappings of that character are here, all the evil is present, she will draw sympathy from you as a viewer, and that's a tribute to McCoy's performance. You will find yourself rooting for her to wind up with Athos at some point during this series, and you will be surprised by that. It's almost ridiculous considering what she does and how evil she is. Alexandre Dowling plays Queen Anne. Queen Anne has a much more expanded role in The Musketeers than I have seen her in other films. She has something going on similar to what Queen Anne has going on in The Man in the Iron Mask, the version with Leonardo DiCaprio, where she's involved with D'Artagnan, who's played by Gabriel Byrne in that film. Here she's not involved with D'Artagnan, but she is involved with someone. It's an interesting subplot that plays through the entire series and has ramifications throughout for the characters, and it plays out very interestingly, and I like that they put this in here. Dowling does a great job with it. The villains in the series are incredible. Peter Capaldi plays Richelieu in season 1. He's excellent. He falls somewhere in between Charlton Heston's calculating, low-key performance in the early 70s films and Tim Curry's over-the-top scenery-chewing turn in the 1990s film. He's right in the middle, but it's a very unique take on it. He's very evil. He's sympathetic at times. It's a great performance. At the end of season 1, Capaldi got the call to play the role of Doctor Who. And since it was a dream of his, he took that opportunity and left the series. And you had to wonder how they were going to fill this hole, because Richelieu was so integral to what was happening, and he was such a great villain. And they bring in Mark Warren as Rochefort. Now, we hadn't seen that character in the series up to that point, and they take him in a very different direction. He's just as evil as Richelieu, but in a completely different way. He's not just carrying out what Richelieu was doing, he's doing something completely different. He's just as effective as Richelieu in a very different way. By season 3, we get McNulty and Rupert Everett. They are doing something, again, different than what we saw in season 1 and season 2. Completely effective, great foils for the Musketeers, great for the plot line. Hugo Spears plays Trouville. He's a strong character here. His role is much more expanded than what we see in the films. He's like a father figure to all the Musketeers. His presence is important, and his character, his arc grows throughout the course of the series, and it's very interesting, and I was very pleased to see what they did with that character, and he does a great job with the role. And then King Louis. Ryan Gage plays King Louis, and King Louis is one of those thankless roles because it's so hard to like Louis. He's so arrogant and vain, and Gage portrays that very well, but he finds some nuance which draws sympathy, much like Milady de Winter, out of the viewer. He's able to bring you around to see his point of view. Even though he's rich and he's privileged and he's the king and his word is law, There are times where you feel very sorry for this character, and again, that goes to show how good the acting in the series is. The creator definitely wanted to tell an old school story, and it is just that. And my only criticism of the series, frankly, is I just didn't want it to end. It's 3 seasons long, 30 episodes. Each season has 10 episodes, and they almost play like 3 individual series, although they are definitely linked by the story arc. And I remember after seeing it the first time, I didn't want to watch it again. But it wasn't because I didn't love it. It was actually the opposite. I just didn't want to see it end. The last episode definitely draws the series to a conclusion. I can only hope that maybe someday they'll revisit it in a television film or even perhaps a feature film, because the characters are so great here and the actors did such a great job. If they can bring this cast back together, I'd be all in for that. This is a great series. You don't have to like the Three Musketeers. You don't have to like period pieces. You just have to like great acting, tight writing, and old school adventure. And for you, this will be one to see. In fact, it'll be one for all to see. See what I did there?
Oh, Daddy.